Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku wielded the Blade of Eternity. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the unforged peaks was thin and sharp, tasting of cold stone and ancient ice. It was a brutal, primordial landscape, a jagged spine of mountains that predated the age of quirks, a place where the bones of the world were laid bare. The very name felt like a warning. These were not peaks shaped by gentle erosion or tectonic grace. They were violent, raw, and fundamentally untamed. Jagged granite spires clawed at the bruised purple of the high-altitude sky, their faces scarred by millennia of wind and solitude. Lichen, the color of dried blood, clung stubbornly to rock faces, the only visible sign of life in a 10-mile radius. For the students of Class 1A, it was a world away from the manicured lawns and state-of-the-art facilities of UA High. Everyone, sound off! Team Alpha, status report. Tenya Ida's voice, crisp and authoritative, cut through the keening wind. His arm, encased in the silver plating of his hero costume, chopped through the air with military precision. Even in the middle of nowhere, he was the unwavering pillar of Class 1A. Team Alpha is secure, Ida! Came Ochako Uraraka's cheerful reply over the comms. We've stabilized the northern pylon and are evacuating the last of the civilians. Kirishima's holding up the main beam. He says it's manly as heck, whatever that means. A low chuckle rumbled from Eijiro Kirishima. It means this thing is heavy. But no worries, it's not going anywhere. Izuku Midoriya, posted as a lookout on a precarious rocky outcrop, allowed himself a small, controlled smile. He adjusted the comm unit in his ear, his gaze sweeping across the simulated disaster zone below. The exercise was complex. A high-magnitude earthquake had supposedly struck a remote geological research outpost. Their mission was twofold: rescue the 20 highly advanced training dummies, programmed to mimic panicked human behavior, and stabilize the damaged facility before a simulated aftershock brought the whole thing down. It was the kind of training that pushed them to their limits, forcing them to think not just as fighters, but as saviors. Mr. Aizawa had been adamant about that distinction. A hero who can only punch is just a thug with a license, he told them, his voice a gravelly monotone that somehow carried more weight than a shout. Below, the scene was a symphony of controlled chaos. Shoto Todoroki had created a massive ramp of ice, allowing medics and equipment to bypass a collapsed roadway. Momo Yayorozu was directing a small team, rapidly creating splints, braces, and emergency shelters from her skin. Even Katsuki Bakugo, in a rare display of focused teamwork, was using precise, controlled explosions to clear debris from a blocked entrance, his usual rage channeled into something resembling productive intensity. Oh, Deku! See anything up there besides your own stupid thoughts? Bakugo's voice crackled through the comms, laced with its familiar brand of aggressive affection. Deku focused his eyes, his mind already running a dozen different threat assessments. All clear, Kaken. The western ridge is stable. No signs of secondary geological instability. He had spent hours poring over geological charts of the unforged peaks, memorizing fault lines and rock strata. He knew, for instance, that the particular type of granite they were standing on was unusually dense, prone to shearing fractures under stress. It was a detail he'd logged away, a piece of trivia that felt important, though he couldn't say why. One for all hummed beneath his skin, a reservoir of coiled power that felt electric in the thin air. He was using a steady 8%, a comfortable level that allowed for enhanced senses and rapid movement without putting undue strain on his body. Green lightning, faint as static, flickered around his limbs. The vestiges within the quirk were quiet today, observing, a silent council in the back of his mind. He was about to give a more detailed report when a new sound reached his ears, a low, grinding rumble that didn't match the patterns of the wind or the distant sounds of his classmates. It came from the south, from behind the main mountain spire. Mr. Aizawa, Deku said, his voice suddenly tight. I'm hearing something. A rhythmic, grinding sound. It's not natural. On the ground, Shota Aizawa's head snapped up. His eyes, usually half-lidded with exhaustion, were now wide and alert. He was perched on a communications tower they'd erected, his capture weapon coiled loosely around his neck. Location Midoriya? South-southwest. Moving towards us. It's getting louder. The grinding intensified, accompanied by a deep, guttural vibration that resonated through the soles of Deku's boots. The students below paused, their practice drill faltering as they turned towards the noise. Then he appeared. A section of the mountainside a quarter-mile away didn't just crumble, it unfolded. Massive plates of rock peeled back like the petals of some horrific stone flower, revealing a tunnel of raw, churning earth. From it emerged a figure, colossal and monstrous. He was a man, perhaps, but he was clad in an armor of living rock, slabs of granite and basalt shifting and grinding over his form. His body was a grotesque mockery of human anatomy, with arms as thick as tree trunks and a head encased in a jagged helmet of obsidian. In the center of his chest, a normal-sized man was embedded, his face contorted in a sneer of arrogant power. Well, 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 the man's voice boomed, amplified by the resonating stone. Look what we have here. A whole flock of little Yui chickadees, playing hero in my backyard, and with all this shiny new equipment, Aizawa was already moving. Villain attack! All students code orange. Prioritize civilian safety and fall back to the designated rally point. This is not a drill, the villain laughed, a sound like an avalanche. Code orange? How cute. You can call me Landslide. And I'm just here to make a withdrawal. He slammed a stony fist into the ground. The earth didn't just shake, it obeyed. A wave of rock 10 feet high surged towards the disaster site. Todoroki reacted instantly, throwing up a glacial wall of ice to meet it. The two forces collided with a deafening roar, a cataclysmic impact of stone and frost that sent shrapnel flying in every direction. He's a high-level terrain manipulator! Deku shouted into his calm, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive even as his heart hammered against his ribs. His quirk seems to be a form of telekinesis, but he's not just moving the rock, he's absorbing it. That armor isn't a costume, it's part of him. No shit, Sherlock! Bakugo roared, launching himself into the air with a series of concussive blasts. Stay out of my way! He flew towards Landslide, his palms crackling with explosive energy. Bakugo, wait! We don't know the full extent of his abilities! Ida yelled, but it was too late. Landslide grinned, raising a massive arm. Bakugo unleashed an AP shot, a concentrated blast of power that could punch through concrete. It struck Landslide's shoulder with a sharp crack. The rock armor fractured, spiderwebbing with fissures, and then instantly reformed, the cracks filling with new stone that flowed like liquid before hardening. Nice popgun! Landslide sneered, and swatted Bakugo out of the air like a fly. Bakugo twisted, using a smaller explosion to right himself, but the casual display of power sent a chill through everyone watching. This villain was far beyond the B-rank intel they'd been given for the exercise parameters. This was something else entirely. Deku's attention was split. His primary duty was rescue. His eyes darted to the training area and locked onto a single detail they'd missed. One of the training dummies, designated Civilian 17, was wedged precariously under a slab of concrete near the edge of a deep, newly formed fissure in the ground, a direct result of Landslide's first attack. His instincts screamed at him. Save them. That's the job. Mr. Aizawa, I have a visual on a trapped civilian dummy, Sector Gamma, near the main fissure. It's in an unstable position. Forget the dummy, Midoriya. Fall back. Aizawa commanded, his eyes glowing a menacing red as he activated his erasure quirk, trying to get a clear line of sight on the villain embedded in the rock. But Deku's body was already moving. It was a dummy, yes, but the principle was everything. You don't leave anyone behind. He activated full cowling, green lightning flaring around him, and bounded down the rock face in a series of controlled, ricocheting leaps. He landed silently beside the trapped dummy, his mind assessing the situation in a fraction of a second. The concrete slab was too heavy to lift quickly, but the ground beneath it was fractured. A well-placed smash. So dedicated. Landslide's voice rumbled closer now. He'd taken 2 steps, each one the size of a small house, and was now towering over the training ground. Aizawa's erasure was having no effect. The rock armor was a physical construct, not an active part of the quirk. Playing hero until the very end. I admire that. Landslide raised both of his colossal, stony hands. He wasn't aiming for Deku, or Bakugo, or Todoroki. He was aiming for the mountain itself. "Let's see how you handle a real disaster!" he roared. He plunged his hands deep into the mountainside, into the very strata Deku had studied. The world screamed. It was a sound of shearing rock, of a billion tons of granite being torn from its ancient moorings. Deku looked up, and his blood ran cold. The entire western face of the spire above them was groaning, shifting, breaking apart. Landslide wasn't causing a rock slide. He was triggering a full-scale structural collapse of the peak. "DKU, move!" Uraraka screamed, her voice shrill with terror. Deku didn't hesitate. He grabbed the dummy, yanked it free, and hurled it with all his strength towards the center of the field, where Kirishima and Siro could grab it. But that single, heroic act cost him a precious second. The ground beneath him gave way. It wasn't a fall. It was a deletion. One moment, he was on solid ground. The next, the world was gone, replaced by a stomach-lurching plunge into absolute darkness. The fissure, widened by the mountain's collapse, had swallowed him whole. His last sensation was the feeling of his comm unit being torn from his ear, the panicked shouts of his friends abruptly cutting out, leaving him alone in the roaring, tumbling black. Rock and debris rained down around him, the impacts against his body muffled by the rush of wind and his own frantic heartbeat. He twisted in the air, trying to orient himself, but there was no up or down, only a terrifying, endless void. One for all flared instinctively, a desperate attempt to protect him, but there was nothing to push off of, nothing to grab. He was falling, and falling. The descent felt like an eternity. He passed through layers of absolute blackness, the roar of the collapse above fading to a distant memory. He was alone with the sound of his own ragged breathing and the whistle of air past his ears. He braced for the inevitable, deadly impact, a silent prayer on his lips. The impact, when it came, was not the bone-shattering finality he expected. He struck something hard, yes, a sloping surface of stone that sent a jolt of agony through his right leg. He cried out, tumbling down the incline, his body scraping against rough-hewn rock before finally coming to a stop on a flat, level surface. For a long moment, there was only pain. His leg throbbed with a searing fire, likely broken. His ribs ached, and a dozen new cuts and bruises made themselves known. But he was alive. Slowly, painfully, Deku pushed himself up. His vision swam. He was in a cavern, a vast, yawning space hidden within the mountain's heart. The only light came from a single, impossibly perfect beam filtering down from a crack in the ceiling high above, the very fissure he'd fallen through. It was a spotlight in the oppressive dark, illuminating a circle of floor about 50 feet in diameter. The air was wrong. It was cold, but it was also profoundly still. There was no wind, no echo of the chaos above. The silence was so complete it felt heavy, pressing in on him, muffling the world. It was the silence of a tomb, of a place forgotten by time itself. His eyes adjusted to the gloom. He wasn't just in a cavern. He was in a structure. The floor was made of smooth, polished obsidian, cool and perfect beneath his gloves. As his gaze followed the beam of light, he saw that the walls were not natural rock, but were carved with intricate, geometric patterns unlike anything he had ever seen. They were not Japanese, not Chinese, not Egyptian. They were alien, ancient, belonging to no known culture. And in the very center of the illuminated circle, directly under the beam of light, stood an altar. It was a simple, stark thing, a single block of unadorned white stone that seemed to drink in the surrounding darkness. It was the only object in the entire cavern, and it commanded the space with an aura of immense gravity. Resting on that altar was a sword. It was a katana, but it was unlike any blade he had ever seen in museums or books. It was housed in a simple, unadorned scabbard of matte black wood. The hilt was wrapped in black ray skin and dark, silken cord, also devoid of any ornamentation. There was no clan sigil, no maker's mark, nothing. It was utterly anonymous. Yet, it was the most compelling object he had ever laid eyes on. He limped closer, his injured leg protesting with every step. The silence seemed to grow deeper as he approached the altar, the air growing colder. He felt a strange pull, a resonance deep within his chest. It wasn't a physical force, but a psychic one. It was a hum, a low thrumming note on a frequency only his soul could hear. It felt like a question, a call, a whisper of a promise. The vestiges within One for All stirred. It wasn't a conscious reaction, but a primal one, like animals sensing an approaching storm. They were agitated, confused. This power, this presence, was utterly foreign. It wasn't a quirk. It was something other. He reached the altar, his breath catching in his throat. He could see the blade more clearly now. It was black, not painted black, or coated black, but a black so deep and absolute it seemed to devour the light that touched it. It was a sliver of nothingness, a void given form and edge. It didn't reflect the beam from above, it drank it. The very air around the blade's edge seemed to shimmer and distort, as if reality itself was wary of getting too close. This was a pre-quirk artifact. It had to be. This shrine, this blade, it was from a different epoch of humanity, a forgotten age sealed away inside the mountain. What is this place? He wondered, his hand hovering over the hilt. A voice, booming and distorted, suddenly echoed down from the fissure above. Nowhere to run, little hero! I felt you fall! Did you really think a little hole in the ground could save you from me? Deku's head snapped up. The sound of shifting, grinding rock grew louder. Landslide was coming for him. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He was injured, separated from his team, his calms were down, and a villain who could swat Bakugo out of the sky was descending upon him. He was trapped, utterly, completely trapped. His eyes darted around the cavern. There were no other exits. Just smooth, seamless walls and the altar. His gaze fell back to the sword. The hum in his soul intensified, becoming a clear, resonant tone. It was a feeling of purpose, of destiny, of a tool waiting for a hand. It felt ancient and lonely, a sentinel that had waited for untold centuries. He felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of kinship with that loneliness. He, too, had been alone, a quirkless boy dreaming of being a hero. It's just a sword, a rational part of his mind screamed. It's a piece of metal. What can it do against a man who commands mountains? But another part of him, the part that was now intertwined with the legacy of One for All, felt the truth. This was no mere piece of metal. This was power. Different from a quirk, but power nonetheless. The sound of debris clattering down the slope grew louder. Landslide was getting closer. Deku could hear his guttural breathing now. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at his own hands, scarred and battered from his training. He looked at the sword, silent and waiting. He had no other choice. It was a desperate, insane gamble, but it was the only one he had. Please! He whispered to the silent chamber, to the ancient blade, to whatever god might be listening. Please work! With a shaking hand, he reached out and wrapped his fingers around the hilt. The world ended, and was reborn in a single, silent instant. The moment his skin touched the hilt, his consciousness fractured. It wasn't a psychic assault, it was an information cascade, a torrent of existence pouring into him through the point of contact. Sight. 1,000,000 battles under 1,000 different suns. A silver-haired warrior cutting the chains from a colossal beast. A cloaked figure standing on a battlefield of dust and whispers, the sole survivor. A star-strewn sky collapsing into a singularity. A weaver's loom, vast as the cosmos, where threads of light were woven and snipped. Sound, the clang of steel against concepts he couldn't name. The final, gasping breath of a dying king. The first cry of a newborn universe. The tolling of a single, immense bell that vibrated through all of creation. A chorus of 1,000,000,000 voices whispering a single word, balance, feeling. A loneliness so profound it felt like the heat death of the universe. A sense of duty as heavy as a neutron star. The cold, serene finality of an ending. The burning, hopeful spark of a beginning. The crushing weight of every decision ever made. The energy of the blade surged into him, and it met the power of One for All. It was not a merger. It was a collision. The warm, vibrant river of Oefe, filled with the wills and hopes of its 8 previous wielders, crashed against a cold, dark, ancient ocean, vast and deep and utterly indifferent. The vestiges within him cried out in shock and confusion. They felt the blade's nature, its terrifying, fundamental purpose. Nana Shimura recoiled in horror. It cuts life. It's a murderer's tool. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, felt something else. Ah. And a sliver of hope. It is outside my brother's power. It is something he cannot steal, something he cannot comprehend. The blade, in turn, recognized Deku. It didn't see a boy. It didn't see a hero in training. It felt the compounded soul within him, the layered destiny of one for all, and it judged him worthy. It sensed the immense weight he already carried and offered him another, infinitely heavier. It whispered its name into the core of his being, a name that was also a definition, the Blade of Eternity. The flood of sensory data lasted for an eternity and a microsecond. Deku's mind, fortified by the presence of the vestiges, somehow held itself together, but only just. He gasped, his knuckles white as he gripped the hilt, the cold of it seeping into his very bones. A shadow fell over him. Deku looked up, his eyes wide and unfocused, still reeling from the psychic cataclysm. Landslide stood at the edge of the illuminated circle, his rocky form casting a monstrous silhouette. He had shed most of his armor to navigate the narrow fissure, but he was still a formidable sight. The man at his center grinned, a cruel, predatory expression. There you are! Landslide grunted, his eyes fixing on the sword in Deku's hand. He let out a short, derisive laugh. Hiding in a cave with a toy sword? You're done, kid! Your little friends can't save you down here. He took a step forward, his hand morphing and extending, sharpening into a spear of jagged granite. The air crackled with menace. Deku's mind was still a whirlwind of alien memories and cosmic sensations. He could feel the weight of the sword in his hand, not its physical weight, but its conceptual weight. He could feel the cold, sharp purpose humming along its edge. He didn't understand it. He couldn't possibly comprehend it. But as Landslide charged, roaring, his stone spear aimed directly at Deku's heart, one instinct, forged in the heart of that psychic storm, rose above all others. Defend. He didn't know how to wield a sword. He had no training, no technique. But as the villain lunged, Izuku Midoriya, the ninth wielder of One for All, raised the Blade of Eternity. He didn't swing to kill, or to wound, or even to parry. He swung to protect. The black blade, a sliver of void in the dim light, moved in a simple, desperate arc, ready to meet the attack. The universe, condensed into a single, terrifying second, had just finished ripping through Izuku Midoriya's mind. The aftershocks were still rattling his soul, leaving behind a residue of cosmic dust and the ghost scent of ozone and eternity. His hand was fused to the hilt of the black katana, not by heat or force, but by a sense of sudden, irrevocable belonging. The cold of the weapon was no longer just a temperature. It was a state of being, a deep, resonant stillness that had sunk into his marrow. He was looking up, his green eyes wide with a mixture of his own terror and the echoes of a million other moments that were not his own. The shadow of Landslide fell over him, a moving mountain of malice and stone. The villain's face, embedded in the center of his rocky torso, was a mask of supreme confidence. To him, this was the end of the chase. A cornered, injured rat and a pretty antique. There you are! Landslide's voice was a gravelly boom that seemed to shake the very dust motes dancing in the single beam of light. Hiding in a cave with a toy sword? You're done, kid! Your little friends can't save you down here. He took a ponderous step forward. The obsidian floor, which had likely not felt a footstep in millennia, didn't even creak. Landslide's right arm began to transform, chunks of granite and schist flowing like thick mud, compressing and sharpening until it formed a wicked, 3-foot spear of solid rock. The tip was cruelly sharp, glinting in the dim light. Deku's mind, a frantic mess of incoming data, tried to process the threat. Villain. Attack. Injured leg. Trapped. The sword, the sword. The whispers of the blade's first touch were still coiling in his psyche, a sense of duty, a feeling of balance, the chilling finality of an ending. He didn't understand any of it. He only knew the weight in his hand felt like the only real thing in the universe. As Landslide roared, a sound of grinding tectonic plates, and lunged forward with surprising speed, that one pure, desperate instinct forged in the fires of Yui rose above the psychic chaos. Defend. It was not a thought of victory. It was not a plan of attack. It was the fundamental, bedrock principle of heroism that All Might had instilled in him from day one. protect, save, endure. He didn't have the grace of a swordsman, or the technique of a warrior. He was a brawler, a powerhouse who fought with his fists and feet. But now, his only tool was the alien object in his hand. He raised the blade of eternity, a clumsy, two-handed motion born of sheer desperation. His stance was all wrong, his balance compromised by his throbbing leg. He held the black katana up to meet the charging point of the stone spear. Time seemed to stretch, thinning into a fragile membrane. He braced for the impact, for the shattering clang of stone on steel, for the force that would surely break his arms and drive him to the ground. The impact never came. Landslide's stone spear passed through the black blade. There was no sound. No resistance. No shower of sparks. For a breathtaking, physics-defying moment, the solid spear of granite occupied the exact same space as the solid blade of the katana. It was like watching a ghost pass through a wall. The blade's edge, a line of perfect nothingness, slid effortlessly through the villain's weapon, through his rocky arm, through his chest of shifting stone, and finally, through the fleshy body of the man embedded within. Landslide's momentum carried him forward, his spear now harmlessly past Deku's shoulder. He stumbled to a halt, a look of profound confusion on his face. He looked down at his chest. There was no wound, no blood. Not even a tear in his jumpsuit. He looked at his stone spear. It was completely intact. He looked back at Deku, who was staring, utterly bewildered, at the sword in his own hands. What? Landslide started to sneer, ready to mock the boy's useless antique. Was that supposed to do some? His words died in his throat. The change was not physical, it was existential. The arrogant, cruel confidence in his eyes flickered, like a candle flame hit by a sudden draft. It wavered, then sputtered, and then, in an instant, was extinguished completely. What was left was a raw, primal nakedness. The sneer on his lips didn't just vanish, it collapsed, his facial muscles going slack as if the strings holding them up had been cut. His eyes, which moments before had held only contempt, widened into vast, dark pools of utter horror. He wasn't looking at Deku. He was looking past him, through him, into a nameless abyss that had suddenly opened up within his own soul. Deku hadn't cut him. He hadn't cut his armor or his flesh or his bone. He had cut his courage. The blade of eternity, responding to the purest, most desperate intent, defend, had not sought to harm the attacker. It had identified the source of the aggression, the fuel for the villain's malice, his bravado, his confidence, the thick, callous shell of arrogance he had built around himself over a lifetime of cruelty, and the blade had severed it. It had unmade it. All that was left was the man underneath. A man who was, it turned out, profoundly, deeply, and elementally afraid. Landslide, no, the man he was before, the man he had always been deep down, let out a small, choked gasp. His stony armor, which moments before had seemed like an extension of his will, began to feel like a cage, a tomb. He was trapped inside a mountain of his own making, and the weight was suddenly suffocating. He started to tremble, a fine tremor that grew into a violent, full-body shudder. The massive stone limbs that had seemed so powerful now felt alien and uncontrollable. His gaze darted around the dark cavern, and he saw not just shadows, but things in the shadows. Writhing shapes with too many eyes. The glint of teeth in the oppressive blackness. The floor felt like it was tilting, the walls closing in. The single beam of light from above was no longer a spotlight. It was the eye of some vast, judgmental god, staring down at him, seeing every wretched, pathetic secret he had ever kept. He saw the face of every child he'd terrified. The pleading eyes of the security guards he'd crushed. He felt the cold, damp earth of the prison cell he knew was waiting for him. He felt the gnawing terror of being small again, of being weak, of being worthless. His entire life, he had run from that feeling, burying it under literal tons of rock and rage. Now, the shield was gone. The fear, raw and unfiltered, was all he was. No! He whimpered, the sound pitifully small in the vast chamber. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. The great stone armor clattered and groaned with his clumsy movements. No, please, get them away from me! He clawed at his own chest, trying to tear himself free from the rock that encased him. His fingers, still tipped with sharp stone, scraped uselessly against the granite. It's too dark in here. They're watching. Don't let them get me. Please! He collapsed onto the obsidian floor, curling into a fetal position. The massive, craggy form of Landslide, the villain who had single-handedly defeated a dozen heroes and collapsed the mountain, was reduced to a sobbing, whimpering ball, shielding his head from horrors only he could see. Deku stared, his arms still weakly holding the blade aloft. The sword felt impossibly heavy now, not with physical weight, but with the gravity of what it had just done. He hadn't thrown a punch, he hadn't broken a bone. He had simply unraveled a man. He had reached into his soul and snipped a thread, and the entire tapestry of his identity had come undone. A wave of nausea washed over him. What did I do? He lowered the sword, its tip clinking softly against the obsidian floor. The sound was like a thunderclap in the tomb-like silence, broken only by the villain's pathetic sobs. And then the price came due. It started as a headache, a dull throb behind his eyes. He thought it was just the adrenaline fading, the pain from his fall catching up to him. He took a staggering step back from the weeping villain, his mind trying to process the impossible event. Then, the headache exploded into a firestorm. The world dissolved into a screech of psychic static. The ancient cavern vanished. The sobbing villain faded. Deku was falling again, but this time it was not into a chasm of rock, but into a well of memory. Another man's memory. Flash. He is 6 years old. His name is Kaido Tanaka. He's small for his age, with knees permanently scabbed from falling. His quirk has just manifested. He can make pebbles wiggle. Just wiggle. His father, a man with a minor but flashy pyrotechnic quirk, looks at him with undisguised disappointment. That's it? That's all you can do? The words are not just spoken. Deku feels them. A physical blow of shame that makes his cheeks burn and his stomach twist into a cold, hard knot. He feels the rough texture of the gravel under his small hands, smells the dusty air of the playground where other kids are showing off, creating sparks and gusts of wind. Deku cried out, clutching his head. The pain was unbearable. It wasn't just watching a memory, it was living it. He was Kaido. He felt the sting of tears in his 6-year-old eyes, the crushing weight of his father's disapproval. Flash. He is 14. The bullying is relentless. They call him Pebble Boy. Kaido the quirkless wonder. His quirk has grown, but only marginally. He can lift rocks now, maybe the size of his fist, but it's slow, clumsy. One day, after school, a group of boys corners him. Their leader, a boy who can harden his skin into a dull metal, shoves him to the ground. Make a pebble dance for us, Kaido! They laugh. The laughter is a physical force, pressing him down, suffocating him. He feels a surge of impotent, burning rage, a hatred so pure and hot it feels like it's going to melt him from the inside out. He focuses all his will, all his shame and anger, on the ground beneath them. A chunk of asphalt, the size of a dinner plate, rips free and smacks the lead bully in the shin. It's the first time he's ever really hurt someone. The boy yelps in pain. The others look shocked. And in their shock, Kaido sees a flicker of something new. Fear. It feels good. It feels like power. Deku gasped, stumbling backward until his back hit the cold, carved stone of the cavern wall. He slid to the floor, the blade of eternity clattering from his numb fingers. He was drenched in a cold sweat. He could taste the metallic tang of blood in his mouth from where Kaido had bitten his lip in rage. He felt the vicious, triumphant thrill of seeing his tormentor afraid of him. It was a vile, intoxicating feeling, and it was churning in his own gut. This was the echo. The cost of wielding the blade. When it severed something, the wielder was flooded with the context. To cut courage, he had to experience the fear it was built to hide. He had to live the life that had necessitated its construction. Flash. He is 22. He calls himself Landslide now. A joke at first, a bitter acknowledgement of his earth-shattering power. But the name stuck. His quirk, fed by years of resentment and relentless training, has become monstrous. He can absorb earth and stone, wearing it like armor, commanding it like a king. He's no longer Kaido Tanaka, the weakling. He is a force of nature. He robs an armored car, not for the money, but for the sheer spectacle. He feels the satisfying crunch of metal under his stone fist, sees the terror in the guard's eyes. That terror is his drug. It is the only thing that silences the voice of the 6-year-old boy on the playground. It is the only thing that makes him feel big. Strong. Real. Deku was shaking uncontrollably now, his teeth chattering. He was curled up on the floor, mirroring the very villain he had just defeated. He was trapped in Kaido's head, feeling the desperate, hollow addiction to causing fear because it was the only way to keep his own at bay. He felt the cold loneliness of a life built on a foundation of spite. He felt the gnawing emptiness that no amount of power or stolen money could ever fill. The echoes showed him everything. The source of Landslide's confidence wasn't strength. It was a desperate defense mechanism. His bravado was a fortress wall built around a terrified child. And Deku hadn't just knocked down the wall. He had forced the child to stand naked in the dark, surrounded by all the monsters he'd spent his life pretending weren't there. The psychic torrent finally began to recede, leaving Deku gasping on the obsidian floor, his mind feeling scoured raw. The pain lingered, a phantom limb of another man's trauma. He looked over at the villain, Kaido, who was still muttering to himself, his eyes vacant. Deku didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel relief. He felt a profound, soul-deep pity that was so heavy it felt like grief. He had won. But it felt like the most horrible kind of loss. It was in this state of absolute mental and physical exhaustion that the cavalry finally arrived. 2 figures rappelled down through the fissure, their movements swift and precise. The first was a silhouette of lean muscle and floating bandages, his single yellow goggle glowing in the gloom. The second was a mountain of a man, his golden hair catching the light, even his descent seeming heroic. Aizawa and All Might landed silently on the cavern floor. Aizawa's eyes took in the scene in a fraction of a second, his analytical mind processing the impossible tableau. Midoriya, his student, pale as a sheet and trembling on the floor. The villain, Landslide, curled into a ball and weeping like a child. And between them, a black sword that seemed to drink the very light from the air. Midoriya! Aizawa's voice was sharp, cutting through the haze in Deku's mind. He was at Deku's side in an instant, his hand on his shoulder, checking for injuries. All Might, in his skeletal form, rushed past him, his usual booming presence replaced by a frantic, paternal terror. Young Midoriya! Izuku, my boy! Are you hurt? What happened? He knelt beside Deku, his sunken eyes wide with worry. He saw the broken leg, the cuts, the bruises, but he also saw the look in Deku's eyes, a haunted, shell-shocked emptiness that had no place on the face of a 15-year-old boy. Deku looked up at his mentor, his lips trembling. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How could he explain? How could he put the cosmic horror and searing, intimate pain of the last few minutes into language? The sword! He finally managed to whisper, his voice raspy. He pointed a shaking finger at the katana lying on the floor. Aizawa's gaze snapped to the weapon. He approached it cautiously, his capture weapon uncoiling slightly. Ready? He didn't touch it. He circled it, his eyes narrowed. The energy signature in this cavern is bizarre. It's not a quirk. It's something older. Colder. All Might looked from Deku's shattered expression to the catatonic villain, then to the blade. He was the symbol of peace, a man who had faced down the worst evil imaginable. But in this quiet, ancient place, faced with a mystery he couldn't punch, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cavern's temperature. He attacked me, Deku stammered, forcing himself to sit up. The pain from his leg was a grounding sensation, a reminder of the real, physical world. I fell. I found this place. This altar. He followed me down. I grabbed the sword. He trailed off, his gaze becoming distant as the memory replayed. I just swung it. It went right through him. Nothing happened. And then, he just broke. Aizawa crouched down to look at Landslide. He waved a hand in front of the villain's face. No reaction. The man's eyes were locked on some inner horror movie. There are no physical injuries, Aizawa stated, his voice a low murmur. No signs of a struggle. His vitals appear to be elevated, consistent with a severe panic attack, but there's no external cause. He looked back at Deku. Midoriya. Be precise. What did you feel when you swung that blade? Deku flinched, the question itself threatening to bring the echo rushing back. I don't know. It was like I wanted to stop him. Not hurt him, just stop him. The sword. I think it did what I wanted. It took something from him. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Oh God Almighty. I felt his whole life. Everything he was ever afraid of. It was awful. All Might and Aizawa exchanged a look over Deku's head. A look of dawning, terrifying understanding. This wasn't a weapon that cut flesh. It was a weapon that cut the mind. The soul. The Hero Public Safety Commission cannot know about this, Aizawa said, his voice low and firm. There was no room for debate. An unregistered power of this nature? One that can mentally incapacitate a person without leaving a trace? They would lock it in a vault so deep it would never see the light of day again. Or worse, they'd try to weaponize it. All Might nodded grimly. He looked at the blade, at its perfect, terrifying blackness. It was a power outside their frame of reference. It was not a quirk. It was not technology. It was a relic, a thing of myth that had just proven itself horribly, undeniably real. And his successor, his boy, had been the one to awaken it. You're right, All Might said, his voice heavy. He stood up and walked over to the katana. He hesitated for a long moment, then reached down, his bony fingers wrapping around the silk-corded hilt. The moment he touched it, he recoiled, hissing as if he'd been burned. It's cold! A deep, unnatural cold. He felt no psychic backlash, no flood of memories. The blade was silent for him. It had chosen its wielder. But he could feel the wrongness of it, the immense, ancient power lying dormant within. Steeling himself, he carefully picked it up, using a piece of his own torn shirt to wrap around the scabbard so he wasn't touching it directly. Even through the cloth, the chilling presence of the weapon was palpable. We'll get you out of here, young Midoriya, he said, his voice trying for a reassuring tone it couldn't quite find. He helped Deku to his feet, letting the boy lean heavily on him. Aizawa was on his comms, his voice a quiet, clipped command. Aizawa to command. We have Midoriya. He's injured but stable. The villain is incapacitated. Send down a medical retrieval team, and make it discreet. As they waited, the three of them stood in the silent cavern, a strange and broken trinity. The mentor, the teacher, and the student who had just touched eternity and been scarred by it. Deku couldn't take his eyes off the villain, who was now being tended to by Aizawa, still lost in his own personal hell. He hadn't killed him. He hadn't even wounded him. But what he had done felt infinitely more invasive, more violating. He had looked into the abyss of another man's soul, and the abyss had looked back. When the retrieval team arrived, the official story was simple. Midoriya had been injured in the fall. During the ensuing chaos of the mountain's collapse, the villain landslide had suffered a massive, quirk-induced psychological breakdown, trapping himself in a state of paranoid psychosis. It was a plausible, if strange, explanation. No one questioned it. As they hoisted him up, out of the darkness and back into the fading light of the afternoon, Deku took one last look at the ancient shrine. The altar stood empty now, the single beam of light illuminating nothing but a clean, white block of stone. A chapter of history that had been sealed for millennia had been reopened. All Might held the wrapped sword tightly, his expression grim. This was a secret they would have to carry. A burden added to the already immense weight of One for All. Back at the makeshift Yui command post, chaos was giving way to order. The other students were safe, shaken but unharmed. Bakugo had a few new scorch marks on his costume. Uraraka rushed to Deku's side, her face etched with relief and worry. Deku! Are you okay? We were so worried! He tried to smile, but it was a weak, fragile thing. I'm okay, Uraraka. Just a rough fall. He couldn't meet her eyes. He felt disconnected, isolated by the terrible knowledge humming in his veins. He carried the ghost of Kaido Tanaka inside him now, a chilling reminder of the power currently wrapped in cloth in All Might's hands. Later, in the medical tent, as Recovery Girl healed his broken leg with a kiss, All Might and Aizawa stood watch. The sword, the blade of eternity, lay on a nearby table, a slash of black against the sterile white environment. It was silent. Dormant. Waiting. This changes things, Aizawa. All Might murmured, his gaze fixed on the blade. It changes everything. Aizawa agreed, his face unreadable. He can't just be the next symbol of peace anymore. He's now the wielder of that. We have a responsibility to understand what it is, and he has to learn to control it. Because if he can't, he didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood the terrifying implication. A power that could unmake a person's mind, wielded by a boy with the weight of the world on his shoulders, was a combination that could either save the world or shatter it. Deku, lying on the cot, closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time he drifted, he felt the phantom chill of another man's fear, heard the echoes of another man's pain. He had touched the blade of eternity. And its first, terrible lesson was now etched forever onto his soul. The sterile white of the UA infirmary ceiling was the first thing Izuku Midoriya had seen for 3 days. It was a blank, unforgiving canvas that offered no distractions from the turmoil brewing behind his eyes. Recovery Girl had healed his broken leg, mended his cuts, and soothed his bruises, but her quirk, for all its miraculous power, could not touch the injuries that lingered in his mind. He was physically whole, yet he felt fractured, haunted. The echo of Kaido Tanaka was a persistent ghost. It wasn't a constant flood of memory anymore, but a low, toxic hum in the background of his own thoughts. Sometimes, a random stimulus would dredge up a fragment. The taste of the infirmary's bland broth would suddenly be replaced by the phantom flavor of cheap, instant ramen in a cold, lonely apartment. A kind word from Uraraka would trigger a phantom pang of shame, the echo of a teacher's disappointed sigh. He would flinch at shadows in the corner of his eye, his heart momentarily seizing with the memory of a child's night terrors. He was carrying the emotional shrapnel of another man's life, and the weight of it was suffocating. His friends knew something was deeply wrong. Ida's concerned inquiries were more frequent, Todoroki's quiet observations more intense. Bakugo, in his own abrasive way, had simply snarled, "Stop looking like a kicked puppy, you damn nerd. Whatever happened down in that hole, get over it." But even in that, there was a sliver of genuine concern, a demand that he return to the Deku who fought beside him, not this pale, haunted stranger. He hadn't told them. He couldn't. How could he explain that he had defeated a villain not with his fists, but by chemically stripping the courage from his soul? How could he describe the feeling of living another man's entire miserable life in the span of 30 seconds? The blade of eternity was locked away. After their return, All Might and Aizawa had taken it directly to a secure vault deep beneath UA, a place designed by Niza himself to hold things that defied conventional understanding. Deku was glad it was gone. The thought of its cold hilt made his hand ache with a phantom chill, and yet, he felt its absence like a missing limb. A terrifying, dangerous limb, but a part of him nonetheless. That night, sleep was a battle he was losing. He tossed and turned in his dorm room bed, the sheets twisted around him like a shroud. The phantom fears of Kaido Tanaka were louder in the darkness, whispering of failure and worthlessness. Desperate for escape, for answers, for a moment of peace, he closed his eyes and focused inward, reaching for the one place he could perhaps find guidance. He reached for one for all. He didn't just drift into the vestige realm. He plunged into it. The transition was violent, a dizzying lurch as if the world had tilted on its axis. He stumbled and fell, not onto the familiar, smoky floor of his inner world, but onto something cold and cracked. The realm of the vestiges was wrong. The usual ethereal space, a vast chamber of swirling gray mist and shadow thrones, was corrupted. A creeping, chilling stillness emanated from where Deku stood, spreading like frost over a windowpane. The edges of the misty realm seemed to fray and glitch, like a bad video signal. A low, discordant hum, the same soul-deep frequency as the blade, permeated the air, putting the very fabric of this mental world on edge. The vestiges were all there, but their forms were agitated. They flickered, their edges less defined than usual. They were all standing, their attention fixed entirely on him. The first to speak was Nana Shimura. She floated towards him, her usual warm, encouraging smile gone, replaced by a look of profound horror and grief. Her form flickered more violently than the others, as if proximity to him was causing her pain. "Izuku," she said, her voice trembling, laced with a horrified disbelief he had never heard from her before. "What have you done? What is that stain on your soul?" Deku looked down at his hands. To him, they looked normal. But to the vestiges, beings of pure consciousness and energy, he was tainted. The blade's echo wasn't just a memory. It was a foreign energy signature, a cold, dark infection clinging to the warm light of One for All. "Nana! He began, his voice weak. "Don't!" she cried, flinching back. "That weapon. We felt it. The moment you touched it. A power that severs. It cut that man's life without ending his heartbeat. It's a tool for assassins. For monsters. It is the antithesis of everything we stand for." Her words were like physical blows. He saw the face of her grandson, Tamura Shigaraki, in his mind's eye, a life twisted by hatred, a path of destruction. Was this what she saw in him now, the potential for that same kind of violation? "It's a murderer's tool, Izuku," she insisted, her voice cracking with emotion. "It kills the spirit. It leaves a hollow shell. That is not rescue. That is not heroism. It's a desecration. You are the symbol of peace, not a soulless executioner." A heavy silence followed her outburst. The other vestiges watched, their expressions a mixture of shock and grim agreement. Haikid Shinomori, the fourth user, clutched his own face, the scars there seeming to deepen. "The danger, the sheer, absolute danger, it radiates from you, ninth. It's a power that invites ruin." And the sixth user was wreathed in a thicker cloud of smoke than usual, as if trying to obscure himself from the blade's lingering energy. "To unmake a part of someone. It's an unnatural power. Quirks reshape the world. That thing unmakes it." Deku felt his defenses crumbling. They were right. It was unnatural. It was horrible. The pity he felt for Kaido was proof of that. He had wanted to defend himself, but the result was a fate arguably worse than death. "I didn't have a choice," he whispered, his voice pleading. "He was going to kill me. The cavern was a trap. It was the only thing there." "There is always a choice," Nana retorted, her form solidifying with a surge of conviction. "To fight, to lose, even to die as a hero is better than to win with a villain's weapon. We gave you our power to save people, not to hollow them out." "Enough, Nana." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the emotional storm with calm authority. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, drifted forward. His form, usually the most ethereal, seemed the most stable, the least affected by the blade's chilling influence. He regarded Deku not with horror, but with an intense, analytical curiosity. His eyes, so much like his brother's, held a wisdom born from being the first prisoner, the first spark of rebellion. "You are looking at the weapon," Yoichi said, his gaze sweeping over the other vestiges. "You are not looking at the wielder. Nor are you looking at the enemy." He turned his full attention to Deku. "Ninth. Tell me. What was it like?" Nana gasped. "Yoichi. How can you?" "Let him speak," the first commanded gently. He floated closer to Deku, his presence a calming balm against the psychic chill. "Describe the power. Not the result. The power itself." Deku took a shaky breath, grateful for the reprieve from the condemnation. It responds to intent. I didn't think cut him. I just thought defend. It bypassed his armor. It bypassed his body. It found the source of his will to attack me, his courage, and removed it. Like pulling a single thread, Yoichi's eyes widened slightly. It can target a concept. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of dawning comprehension. And the backlash, he continued, his gaze piercing. Nana felt the echo of death. You experienced something else. You felt his life. Deku nodded miserably. Everything. His childhood, his pain, the reason he became a villain. I felt it all. It was the cost of using it. A profound silence descended upon the realm. Yoichi closed his eyes for a long moment, processing. When he opened them, the calculating light within was brighter than ever. Nana, he said, his voice soft but firm. Your heart is in the right place. Your fear comes from a deep love for this boy and for the symbol we are trying to build. But your fear is blinding you to the truth, he gestured to Deku. This weapon is not a quirk. Think of what that means. My brother, all for one, his very identity is built upon the stealing of quirks. His power is absolute in that domain. He is a king in a world of quirks. But this blade, it is not of that world. It is an artifact from an age before, a power with different rules, a different source. It is a weapon he cannot steal. It is a threat he cannot assimilate. He looked at Deku, a grim flicker of something that might have been hope in his eyes. You used it to sever a man's courage. An abstract concept. If it can cut something as intangible as that, what else can it cut? A connection between a master and a puppet? The very bond my brother uses to grant quirks to his followers? His voice dropped to a near whisper, filled with a gravitas that silenced all dissent. Could it sever the connection between a thief and what he has stolen? The implication hung in the air, vast and terrifying and utterly revolutionary. To disarm all for one. Not to defeat him in a battle of fists, but to unmake the very source of his power, to strip him of his stolen arsenal, leaving him as nothing more than the bitter, hateful man he had always been. Nana Shimura stared, her spectral form frozen. The idea was so audacious, so far beyond the scope of their generations-long war, that it bordered on blasphemy. But the logic was undeniable. It would be a great risk, Yoichi admitted, his gaze never leaving Deku's. The cost, to feel the echoes of every life my brother has destroyed, every quirk he has stolen, it might be a price no sane mind can pay. But the possibility exists. For the first time in a century, we have a weapon that changes the fundamental rules of the game. The other vestiges were silent, caught between Nana's moral horror and Yoichi's stark, strategic hope. The debate was no longer about good versus evil. It was about necessity. Deku felt the shift in the room, the internal conflict now laid bare. It was his conflict. The path of the hero, the clean, righteous path that all might walked, and this new, darker path, one of terrible costs but with the potential for a victory they had never dared to dream of. The choice, Yoichi said, his voice echoing in the silent realm, as always, rests with you, Ninth. We are but whispers. You are the hand that holds the blade. The world of the vestiges dissolved, and Deku snapped awake in his bed, gasping for air. The sun was streaming through his window. Morning had come. But the debate in his soul was just beginning. Miles away, in the most secure office at Yue High, a very different kind of analysis was underway. Principal Nizu, a creature whose intellect was as sharp and dangerous as any villain's quirk, sat perched on his oversized chair, his beady black eyes darting across a dozen monitors. The air hummed with the quiet power of his custom-built servers. Opposite him, Tashinori Yagi sat hunched over, nursing a cup of tea, his skeletal form looking smaller and more fragile than ever. The wrapped blade of eternity lay on the low table between them, a slash of black that seemed to absorb the room's bright, intellectual light. Fascinating, Nizu chirped, his whiskers twitching. Utterly, terrifyingly fascinating. For 2 days he had been engaged in his favorite activity, solving an impossible puzzle. At All Might's request, he had thrown the full force of his intelligence and UA's considerable resources into identifying the weapon. Initial searches were, as expected, fruitless. Nizu explained, spinning his chair to face Tashinori. Keywords like sentient sword, pre-quirk artifact, and psychic weapon yielded nothing but pulp fantasy novels and debunked occult websites. The materials of the blade and scabbard are unknown. Carbon analysis is inconclusive, as if the object actively resists scanning. It is, for all intents and purposes, a scientific impossibility. Tashinori sighed, the sound thin and weary. So we have nothing. Oh, on the contrary! Nizu's grin was sharp and toothy. When science fails, one must turn to a less reputable, but far more interesting, source of data, myth. He brought up a central screen. It was filled with fragmented texts, scanned from ancient scrolls and stone tablets, written in languages that had been dead for thousands of years. I abandoned scientific parameters and broadened the search. I cross-referenced global mythologies containing black swords or conceptual weapons with pre-quirk geological surveys of the unforged peaks. The region has always been an anomaly, you see. Unusually high magnetic interference, strange mineral deposits. There were dozens of local legends, most of them dismissed as folklore. But when you collate them, he highlighted several fragments from different cultures, all describing a similar object. A fragment from an ancient, Proto-Japanese text read, "And the arbiter wielded the Iron no Yaiba, the blade of endless night, which could not cut flesh, but could sever the threads of fate that bound men to their destinies." A pictograph from a lost South American civilization showed a figure holding a black sword, standing over a coiled serpent. The translated inscription was crude. "He who cuts the chain." A third fragment, from a northern European runestone, was the most chilling. "And the bearer of the void scythe would be blessed with victory, but cursed to carry the echoes of all that was unmade, for the blade demands a toll of the soul, and its edge sharpens with sorrow." Toshinori felt a cold dread snake up his spine. "The echoes? Young Midoriya spoke of that." "Precisely," Niza confirmed. "The folklore is consistent on 3 points. 1. The weapon is called the Blade of Eternity, or a regional variation thereof. 2. Its primary function is to interact with the intangible, concepts, connections, fate, will. 3. Using it imparts a psychic backlash, an echo, upon the wielder, forcing them to experience the context of what they have severed. The legends claim that every wielder, every arbiter of balance, was eventually driven mad or consumed by the weight of these echoes." He turned away from the screen, his expression for once devoid of its usual manic glee. It was sober, serious. "Toshinori, what young Midoriya has found is not merely a weapon, it is a cursed instrument of cosmic significance that our ancestors, in their nascent wisdom, recognized as too dangerous for human hands and sealed away. The earthquake did not coincidentally reveal that shrine. The villain landslide was simply the catalyst. That blade was waiting." Toshinori stared at the wrapped sword on the table. A cursed instrument. A blade that drove its wielders mad. And his boy, his successor, a child with a heart too big for his own body, was now its chosen bearer. The thought was unbearable. "We have to lock it away," Toshinori said, his voice firm. "We cannot allow Izuku to touch it again. The risk is too great." His spirit. "Nana Shimura's greatest fear was that the power of one for all would crush my body. My greatest fear is that this thing will shatter his soul." Niza steepled his paws. "A logical, emotionally resonant conclusion. And one that young Midoriya will almost certainly fight you on. He's a child. He doesn't understand the danger, does he not?" Niza countered gently. "He is the only one among us who has felt its power and paid its price. He understands the danger more intimately than anyone. The question you must ask yourself is not whether he understands the risk, but whether he is willing to accept it. And why?" The argument took place later that day, in All Might's office. It was a space that had always been a sanctuary for Deku, a place of encouragement and shared dreams. Today, it felt like an interrogation room. The Blade of Eternity lay between them on the coffee table, still wrapped in Toshinori's shirt, its presence sucking the warmth from the air. "Absolutely not," Toshinori said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He had just finished explaining Niza's findings, the myths, the curse, the madness of past wielders. "The answer is no, Izuku. This blade is a poison. We will keep it secure here at UA, and you will never touch it again. You will focus on mastering one for all. That is your path. That is your destiny." Deku listened, his expression uncharacteristically stoic. The boy who once would have crumpled under All Might's stern gaze was gone, replaced by someone older, more somber. The echo had burned away some of his innocence. The debate with the vestiges had forged a new resolve. "You're wrong, All Might," Deku said, his voice quiet but steady. Toshinori blinked, taken aback by the direct refusal. "Izuku, I am trying to protect you. Did you not hear what I said? This thing drives its users insane." "I heard you," Deku replied, his gaze unwavering. "And you're not wrong to be afraid. When I was in that cavern, after I used it, I thought I was going to lose my mind. I felt a lifetime of fear and hatred and loneliness that wasn't mine. It was the worst thing I've ever experienced." He leaned forward, his hands clenching into fists on his knees. "But you didn't see what I saw before that. Landslide. He was too strong. Bakugo's AP shot barely scratched him. Todoroki's ice was just a temporary wall. He collapsed the mountain with a gesture. My smashes, maybe they would have worked, but he was encased in a fortress of rock. What if I couldn't have reached him? What if the next villain is like that? What if the next villain has a quirk that makes them intangible? Or a quirk that controls minds from a mile away? What if we face an enemy that can't be punched? He looked at his mentor, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. You taught me that being a hero is about saving people. But what if saving them requires more than strength? Landslide was going to kill me. He would have gone on to hurt more people. The blade was my only option. And it worked. It stopped him without killing him. It destroyed his mind. Toshinori shot back, his frustration boiling over. That is not a victory, isn't it? Deku challenged, his voice rising. He's alive. He can be helped. The doctors say his psychosis is already fading. He's just a scared man named Kaido Tanaka now. Is that worse than a crater where a city block used to be? Is that worse than a dozen dead heroes? Sometimes there aren't any clean choices, are there? The question hung in the air, echoing the harsh truths Aizawa had tried to drill into them. Toshinori slumped back in his chair, the anger draining out of him, leaving only a vast, aching sadness. The boy was growing up too fast, asking questions that had no easy answers. This burden is already so heavy, my boy, he said, his voice thick with emotion. One for all, the legacy, the threat of Shigaraki, and all for one. Why would you choose to add the weight of this curse to your shoulders? Deku finally looked down at the wrapped sword. He reached out, his fingers hesitating just above the cloth. Because I don't think it is a choice, he said softly. It found me. It responded to me. Maybe it's a part of my destiny now, too. The first user. He thinks it might be the only thing that can truly defeat All for One. Not by killing him, but by taking away everything he's stolen. He met Toshinori's gaze again, and in his eyes the symbol of peace saw an iron will that mirrored his own. I have to learn to control it, Deku stated. I have to understand it. I have to be strong enough to wield it and pay the price without breaking. If a villain appears that only the Blade of Eternity can stop, and I don't know how to use it because I was too afraid to try, I could never forgive myself. That failure would be worse than any echo. He had taken every argument, the fear, the danger, the madness, and accepted them. He had weighed the risks, and found the risk of inaction to be the greatest of all. He was no longer just a boy who had inherited a quirk. He was a hero claiming his own responsibility. Toshinori looked at the fierce determination on his successor's face, and in that moment, he saw not a child, but the man he was becoming. A man who understood that some burdens are not meant to be shrugged off, but carried. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of defeat, of acceptance, and of immense pride. You have your mother's stubbornness, he murmured, a faint, watery smile touching his lips. And my foolishness. He leaned forward, his expression becoming deadly serious. All right, my boy. But not alone. Never alone. If you are going to walk this path, you will do so under the strictest supervision imaginable. Aizawa will design a training regimen. We will document every effect, every change. The instant we believe this is breaking you, we are stopping. Is that understood? Deku's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and gratitude. He nodded vigorously. Yes, sir. Thank you, All Might. Thank you. He had won the argument. He had claimed his new burden. Later that night, alone in his room, Aizawa brought him the sword. It was no longer wrapped in cloth but housed in a high-tech, lead-lined polymer case with a biometric lock key to Deku, Aizawa, and All Might. Training begins tomorrow at 0500, Aizawa said, his voice its usual gravelly monotone, but his eyes held a new, heavy watchfulness. Don't be late. He left the case on Deku's desk and departed without another word. For a long time, Deku just stared at the case. Then, with a deep breath, he placed his palm on the scanner. The lock hissed open. He lifted the lid. The Blade of Eternity lay on a bed of soft foam, its black scabbard a slash of pure void in the dim light of his room. The whispers were gone. The echo was quiet. But the cold was still there. A deep, silent promise of terrible power and a terrible cost. He reached in, not touching it, but just letting his fingers hover over the hilt. The whispers within, the warnings from without, they were all just noise now. The path was set. He was the ninth wielder of One for All. And now, he was the bearer of the Blade of Eternity. His fight had just become infinitely more complicated. And infinitely more dangerous. The place was called the Black Box. It wasn't its official name. Officially, it was Sublevel Training Ground Gamma, one of the dozens of secret facilities honeycombed deep in the earth beneath UA High. But to the few faculty members who had clearance to use it, it was the Black Box, a place for secrets, for dangerous experiments, and for powers too volatile for the light of day. The walls were made of a matte black, quark-dampening alloy that absorbed sound, light, and almost every form of energy imaginable. There were no windows, no spectator's gallery. The only illumination came from cold, flat LED panels embedded in the ceiling, casting a sterile, shadowless light over the vast, empty space. The air was recycled, carrying the faint, metallic tang of ozone and machinery. It was a place outside the world, a pocket of engineered reality where the normal rules could be bent. At 5 a.m., the silence of the black box was absolute. Then, a heavy door hissed open, and two figures stepped inside. Izuku Midoriya was already dressed in his gamma costume, the reinforced soles of his boots making no sound on the specialized floor. He looked pale in the harsh light, his expression a mixture of anxiety and grim determination. In his hands, he carried the Blade of Eternity, its black scabbard a stark line of void against the green of his suit. He barely slept, his mind a whirlwind of anticipation and dread. Behind him was his new, self-appointed sensei for this particular brand of insanity, Shota Aizawa. His teacher looked even more exhausted than usual, as if the sheer conceptual weight of this training had drained him of what little energy he had. He held a tablet, his eyes already scanning diagnostic data. "All right, Midoriya. Ground rules," Aizawa said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, a deliberate choice to keep the situation as clinical as possible. Rule 1. You do not unsheathe that blade unless I give the express command. Rule 2. The moment you feel any sign of a significant echo, disorientation, memory flashes, emotional bleed, you state the word red. No hesitation. The session ends immediately. Rule 3. You tell me everything. Every sensation, every thought, every flicker of power. Do not hide anything. Am I clear? Crystal clear, Mr. Aizawa. Deku replied, his voice tight. Good. Aizawa tapped his tablet. A section of the floor across the room slid open, and a single, humanoid training bot rose silently into view. It was a standard sparring model, designed to withstand blows up to and including an all-might level smash. It was currently inactive, its optical sensors dark. Your first lesson, Aizawa began, his gaze fixed on Deku, is about the fundamental principle of this weapon, as you described it. Intent. You told All Might it did what you wanted. We're going to test that theory to its absolute limit, he gestured to the bot. I want you to approach the target. Keep the blade sheathed. Place your hand on the hilt and focus. Your intent is simple, activate. Do not think about how, don't puzzle out the mechanics. Just hold the pure, simple concept in your mind. Activate. Deku nodded, took a deep breath, and walked towards the bot. The black box was so quiet he could hear the frantic thumping of his own heart. He stood before the inert machine, a silent metal mannequin. He could feel the blade's deep, resonant cold seeping through his glove, a familiar and unnerving sensation. He closed his eyes, shutting out the sterile room, shutting out Aizawa's watchful gaze. He focused on the hum of One for All, a familiar river of warmth and power within him, and then directed his thoughts to the icy presence of the blade. Activate. He didn't shout it in his mind. He let the thought settle, distilling it down to a single, pure command. Activate. For a moment, nothing happened. He felt a flicker of doubt, a stab of fear that he was just a boy holding a useless lump of metal, that what happened in the cavern was a one-time fluke. Then, a low hum emanated from the bot. Its optical sensors flickered to life, glowing a soft blue. Its joints whirred as it entered its neutral standby protocol. It had powered on. Deku's eyes snapped open. He stared at the bot, then back at his hand on the hilt of the sword. He hadn't touched the machine. He hadn't used the remote. He had simply willed it to turn on. Report. Aizawa's voice commanded from across the room. It worked, Deku stammered, his voice filled with awe. I just thought it, and it turned on. I felt a little spark. A tiny flicker of energy from the blade, like static electricity. No echo. No backlash. Just a connection. Aizawa made a note on his tablet. Good. Now, new intent, deactivate. Deku closed his eyes again, focusing. Deactivate. The bot's blue eyes dimmed, and with a final, soft whir, it powered down, returning to its inert state. It works, Deku breathed. It really works. Don't get cocky. Aizawa's dry voice cut in. You've just learned how to use a cosmic reality warping sword as a universal remote control. The applications are slightly more serious. Now unsheath it. The command sent a jolt of ice through Deku's veins. He looked at Aizawa, who gave him a sharp, impatient nod. With a deep breath that did little to calm his racing heart, Deku drew the blade of eternity. The black metal slid from the scabbard with a sound that wasn't there, a whisper of silence that seemed to pull the sound from the room. The blade itself was a marvel of impossibility. It didn't shine or glint. It was a perfect, razor-thin line of absolute blackness, a physical tear in reality. Holding it unsheathed felt different. The cold intensified, and the low hum in his soul resolved into a clear, sharp note, like a tuning fork struck on the fabric of space-time. The target is the bot's left arm, Aizawa instructed. Your intent is simple, physical. Cut steel. Focus on that and nothing else. The concept of severing metal. Do not use one for all yet, just a basic swing. Deku approached the bot, his knuckles white around the hilt. The memory of the blade passing harmlessly through landslide stone armor was vivid in his mind. This time, it's different. This time, I want it to be solid. I want it to cut. He focused his mind, picturing the molecular bonds of the steel alloy, imagining them parting, shearing cleanly. Cut steel. He swung. The motion was clumsy, lacking any formal training, but his intent was clear. The black blade met the bot's arm. This time, there was a sound, a high, singing sheeing that was over almost as soon as it began. The blade passed through the arm with no resistance, as if it were made of mist. The bot's arm fell to the floor with a heavy, metallic clang. Deku stared at the cut. It was perfect. There were no jagged edges, no signs of heat or stress. It was a flawless, impossibly clean shear, as if the arm had been deleted along a perfect plane. Report, Aizawa said, his voice tight. It cut, Deku said, his voice filled with a new level of awe. Cleanly. I felt a slight feedback. A vibration. A sense of finality. But no echo, as I suspected, Aizawa muttered, typing furiously. The echo is tied to the conceptual weight of the target. A soulless, inanimate object has no life to experience, no courage to sever. The cost is proportional to the consequence. This is our safe zone for training. He deployed 2 more bots. Again. This time the leg. Intent, dull edge. I want you to strike it, but with the intent of a blunt object. Think of hitting it with a baseball bat. Deku frowned, confused, but obeyed. He approached the second bot, focusing his mind on the sensation of a heavy, solid impact. Blunt edge. Impact. He swung the blade. This time, when the black edge met the bot's leg, there was a loud, resonant bong, like a giant striking a temple bell. The blade did not pass through. It slammed into the leg with incredible force, leaving a massive, concave dent in the reinforced alloy and sending the bot staggering backward. Deku stared, dumbfounded. He had hit it with the sharp edge of the blade, but it had impacted like a warhammer. It's a conceptual weapon, Midoriya, Aizawa explained, his voice layered with a rare, intellectual excitement. Its physical properties are secondary to the wielder's intent. You think sharp, it's the sharpest object in existence. You think blunt, it's an unbreakable cudgel. You think intangible, it passes through solid matter. This weapon is not a sword, it is a physical manifestation of your will. The sheer scale of the revelation washed over Deku. The possibilities were endless. And terrifying. No, Aizawa said, his voice turning sharp again. Let's introduce the other variable. One for all, he gestured to the third bot. Activate full cowling at 8%. Your intent will be non-physical again. The bot is powered by an internal energy core in its chest. I want you to sever its connection to that power source. Do not damage the bot physically. Do not damage the core. Just cut the flow of energy. Think of it like snipping a wire, but a wire made of electricity. This was 100 times more complex. Deku took his stance, green lightning beginning to crackle around his body. The warm, vibrant power of One for All surged through him, a stark contrast to the blade's icy stillness. When the two energies met at the nexus of his hands, they didn't fight. Instead, the raw power of OFA seemed to flow into the blade, making the line of blackness seem even deeper, more absolute. The hum in his soul intensified, becoming a resonant chord. He focused on the bot, using his enhanced senses to almost feel the energy thrumming within its chest. He visualized the flow, the circuit. Sever the connection. Cut the power. He moved, his OFA-enhanced speed making him a green blur. He didn't swing the blade in a wide arc. He made a single, precise, surgical flick of his wrist. The tip of the black katana passed through the bot's chest plate without leaving a mark. For a second, nothing. Then, every light on the bot died simultaneously. It froze in place, a statue. Deku skid to a halt, breathing heavily. Report. I felt it. OFA acted like an amplifier. It didn't just give the blade power, it gave my intent clarity, focus. It was like going from a blurry image to high definition. I could feel the connection I was targeting. When the blade cut it, there was a snap. And a tiny echo. Aizawa's head shot up. An echo? From a machine? A very small one. Deku clarified, his brow furrowed in concentration. Not a memory. Just a feeling. The ghost of a command. The last line of code it was trying to process. The feeling of a purpose being unfulfilled. Aizawa stared, a chilling realization dawning on him. Even a machine had a purpose. And severing that purpose had a cost, however small. Everything had a price. This is your new life, Midoriya, Aizawa said, his voice grim. Fluid dynamics. You are going to learn to switch your intent from cut steel to cut connection to blunt edge in the span of a single second. You will learn to use OFA not just as a power source, but as a focusing lens for your will. You will master the physical and the metaphysical, and you will learn to bear the cost of every action. Your training as a hero just got exponentially harder, and so it began. Every morning, before the sun rose, Deku's life was the black box. Aizawa was a relentless, unforgiving teacher. He pushed Deku to his absolute limits. He had Deku face a dozen bots at once, forcing him to switch intents on the fly, disarming one by severing its power, shattering another with a blunt impact, slicing a third to ribbons, and phasing the blade through a fourth to cut the wiring of a bot behind it. Each session left him mentally and physically exhausted, his mind aching from the constant, intense focus. They explored the non-lethal applications endlessly. He learned to sever a bot's connection to the local network, isolating it. He learned to cut the logic of its targeting system, causing it to fire randomly. He even managed, in one particularly difficult session, to cut the concept of hostility from a bot's programming. The machine simply stopped fighting and stood there, placid and harmless. The echo from that was deeply strange, a wave of pure, logical confusion, a cascade of error messages in a machine mind that could no longer reconcile its core directive to fight. During his regular classes, he was a ghost. He was present, but his mind was miles away, deep underground in the black box, replaying Aizawa's lessons. He would stare at a window and contemplate the intent required to cut transparency. He would watch Bakugo train and wonder if he could cut the connection between his friend's hands and his sweat glands, effectively neutralizing his quirk. The thought was both thrilling and horrifying. The blade was changing him. He was becoming more analytical, more detached. He started to see the world not just as a collection of people and objects, but as a tapestry of concepts and connections, a web of intentions and purposes. And he held the scissors, far from the sterile confines of UA, in the grimy, forgotten back alleys of a city that had lost its hope. A new power was stirring. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet. Insidious. He called himself Marionette. His real name was lost to him, a casualty of his own quirk and the twisted experiments of Dr. Garaki. He was a man who looked utterly unremarkable, thin, with lank, dark hair and eyes that seemed too large for his face. He wore simple, comfortable clothes, and his smile was gentle, beatific. He looked like a soft-spoken poet or a kindly librarian. He was the most dangerous man in the city. His quirk was called strings of will. It was a subtle, terrifying form of mental domination. When he made eye contact with someone, truly focused his will upon them, he could attach an ethereal, invisible string of his own consciousness to theirs. It wasn't a brutish mind control that erased the victim's personality. It was far more insidious. It overwrote their desires with his own. They still thought for themselves, they still had their memories and skills, but their ultimate goal, their core motivation, became whatever he wished it to be. They wanted, with all their heart and soul, to please him. He had been an experiment, one of Garaki's side projects in the search for a more perfect form of control than the mindless Noma. But Marionette was too independent, his own will too strong. He had escaped, and now he was building his own vision of a perfect world. His followers were not a cackling mob of villains. They were the lost, the lonely, the disenfranchised. He found them in homeless shelters, in unemployment lines, in grief counseling groups. He would look them in the eye, his gaze filled with a profound, unnerving empathy, and he would offer them what they craved most: purpose. A sense of belonging. The world is filled with discord, he would tell them, his voice a soothing balm. Everyone pulling in their own selfish direction. Ambition, greed, fear, these things are tearing society apart. But what if we all pulled together? What if we all shared a single, harmonious will? We could build a paradise. A world without conflict. A world of perfect peace. They would look into his eyes, and they would see that paradise. They would feel the overwhelming desire to help him build it. The string would attach, a silent, painless process, and they would smile, a genuine, blissful smile. They were no longer lost. They were part of the harmonious soul. The news reports began as minor curiosities. A local gang, known for its violent turf wars, had suddenly and inexplicably disbanded. Its members were now volunteering at soup kitchens, cleaning up parks, and speaking of a man who had shown them the way of harmony. The police were baffled, but couldn't argue with the results. Then, a corporate buyout turned hostile, with protesters clashing daily with riot police. It was a powder keg ready to explode. Marionette appeared, walking calmly into the no man's land between the two factions. He didn't speak into a megaphone. He didn't hold up a sign. He just walked. He met the eyes of the angriest protesters. He met the eyes of the most stressed-out police officers. One by one, they lowered their weapons, their angry placards. The rage drained from their faces, replaced by a placid calm. Within an hour, the riot had dispersed. Protesters were shaking hands with the officers, some even weeping with relief. The news anchors hailed him as a miracle worker, a new kind of pacifist hero who could quell violence with his mere presence. At UA, the faculty watched the broadcast with a growing sense of unease. "There's no record of a hero with a quirk like that," All Might said, his eyes narrowed at the screen. "A mass pacification effect. It's unprecedented. It's too clean." Aizawa grunted, his gaze sharp. "Look at their eyes. All of them. There's a placid, uniform emptiness there. This isn't pacification. This is control." Nizu, watching from his office, felt a thrill of intellectual dread. He cross-referenced the news footage with Dr. Garaki's leaked research notes. The very same notes that had helped them understand the Noma. He found a heavily redacted project file, codenamed Puppeteer. The description was brief but chilling: a proposed alternative to Noma conditioning, a quirk capable of overriding individual will with a dominant consciousness, creating a voluntary hive mind. Subject's own will prove too resilient. Project terminated. Subject escaped. Knees first stood on end. The experiment hadn't been terminated. It had walked out the front door. And it was now gathering an army. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Deku in the dead of night. He was staring at his own reflection in the dark window of his room, the blade of eternity lying on his desk behind him. He was practicing the focus Aizawa had taught him, trying to see the concepts around him. He saw the concept of reflection in the glass, the concept of privacy in his curtains, the concept of rest in his bed. Then he thought back to the news report of the riot. The people hadn't just stopped being angry. They had become something else. Their purpose had been overwritten. A new connection had been forged. His blood ran cold. Connection. He thought of the blade. He thought of his training. Sever the connection. He thought of Marionette, a man who could attach strings of will to people, a puppeteer pulling on the souls of his victims. And he thought of the blade of eternity, a pair of scissors sharp enough to cut the strings. In that moment, Izuku Midoriya understood. His training in the black box wasn't just a precaution. It was a premonition. A new kind of villain was rising, a villain who couldn't be fought with fists or fire, a villain whose power was conceptual, and Deku was holding the only weapon in the world that could meet him on that battlefield. The weight of intent suddenly felt 1,000 times heavier.